Welcome back, friends, and today I'm reading an original novel, Piggy Traitor by Terrace Crawford, Scholastic, Book 5, Chapter 4, Part 2. What happened to Sylvester, while horrific, had seemed like a one-time occurrence. Now, with Foley's disappearance, these incidents were seeming to become anything but isolated. The method of attack was the same in both cases. Sylvester and Foley had been sleeping when they had been dragged off, never to be seen again. He had tried to give his new friends the benefit of the doubt, but there was no longer any denying the truth. One of the 4 other members of his party was infected with the virus. Not only that, whoever it was, they were picking off the others one by one. Diego gripped on his shovel tightened. "Where's Foley?" Diego repeated through gritted teeth, shifting his weight back and forth. All he needed was one real good swing. They all knew it. He had demonstrated it more than once. Terry pulled his muffler from the place that he kept on his hip. Know that he had just come to the same realization as Diego. "It's one of us," Terry said, backing away from the group. "The ones who attacked us in the night. It's one of us." "That's impossible," Lucy finally managed to sputter. "It's true," Diego replied, eyes darting around the room to meet everyone else's. He was disappointed in himself that it hadn't taken this long to see it, but he wanted to admit it. There was a traitor in their midst, and all he knew was that was not him. "One of us is a monster." "It's in more way than one," Lucy cried. "If this is how you treat yourself, friends." "There's no way," Rita whined in disbelief. "The way that virus works. You seem to know an awful lot about how the virus works," Danny brayed. The group turned to Rita, everyone making sure that their backs were to the wall and not exposed to anyone. Any trust that the group had built up over the last couple of days were eroding more and more by the second. "Well, someone has to. We can't all be gallivanting across island taking in strays from who knows where," Ray exclaimed indignantly, gesturing to Lucy and Dio. Dio did seem to recall her mentioning something about a university student, or maybe she had taken a personal interest in the virus. Dio had seen her pulled under by the swarm of creatures outside the city. It had only been for a moment, but none of them needed to be told that a moment was all that it took. "If I'm one of those things, then so is she," Rhea shouted, pointing at an incriminating finger at Lucy. "Me?" Lucy inquired, pointing a finger at herself. She threw back her hand and laughed as though she found that idea very ridiculous. No one else was laughing. "How do we know that we are all just fodder for your next big story?" Rita asked. "Are you accusing me of having had big stories before?" Lucy bristled, making her way across the room to Rita. They were at each other's throats, and there was nothing that Dio could do about it. "Whoa now, why don't we all calm down?" Suddenly they were both being lifted in the air by Terry, who towered over both of them. Danny began to back away slowly. "Terry," he said cautiously, "why don't we put our friends down?" Dio eyed Terry up and down. This was admittedly not a good look for him. The largest of the group holding 2 of the smallest in front of him, like a pair of Cornish hens ready to be devoured. Dio kept his eye fixed on Terry, teething as he poked, as though he would have to leap into action at the moment. Mercifully, Terry put Lucy and Rhea down shortly thereafter. "Come on, guys, you don't really think it's me, do you?" "I thought it was Foley," Rhea admitted. Lucy shook her head fervently. "Foley wasn't infected, he was just a jerk." "Well, it isn't me," Terry cried out. "You are weirdly strong," Danny prodded. "And didn't you say that you had come from Dove Point when you met up with Foley?" Lucy remembered aloud. Terry began to damn her. "Well, yes, but only because it was on my own route." "Don't forget about the kid." Danny turned to Dio, his eyes narrowed. "We were all doing just fine until he showed up. Look at us now." Danny wiped a glare of sweat from his forehead. "Oh, come off it," Lucy shouted, clearly caught up in the moment. "If Dio was one of them, he could have finished me off in the grocery store, couldn't you?" Lucy turned to Dio, who stammered in reply. "I mean, I guess I could. I wouldn't have." "Well then," Danny concluded, "that leaves the big guy." Dio began to see the puzzle pieces, even if they didn't necessarily fit in the way that he wanted them to. Maria said the final piece aloud. "You're the only one of us who had been off the island since the infection started," she stated matter-of-factly. Danny began to advance on Terry, crossing the distance between them. Lucy and Rita joined in, backing the tiger down the stairs. Hey now, what's this? You know you can't throw me out, Terror. Terry was wrong, though, and between the three of them, they absolutely could. He could have easily taken out all four of them, but Terry accepted his fate, wordlessly letting Danny, Lucy, and Rita march him down the stairs and to the front door of the Ellie Enterprises. They wouldn't have even been able to get inside if not for Terry, and here they were leaving him to the elements. Dale watched from afar. Maybe he had grown up to this sort of thing during his time in the wilds of Velia, but the twing of his heartstrings told him that this was not the case. Maybe it was just the opposite, and he felt too close to the situation. Whatever reason, Dio just couldn't reconcile Terry's guilt. Dio's feeling on the subject, however, did not matter. He had been outvoted with tears in his eyes. Lucy opened the door to the outside, and the cool evening wind that blew inside did nothing to cool the tensions among the once tight-knit group. Danny escorted Terry to the outside. Maybe if it was resignation, maybe Terry had come to accept that his ruse was up. Maybe he didn't say anything as Danny sealed the door shut behind him, leaving Terry to the elements. No one said much for the rest of the evening, to be fair. What was there to be said? They were out they had outed the traitor in the midst, but that at what cost? In the short time that Dio had been a member of this group, Terry had always been there for them, and his absence was felt among the now quartet like a searing shot through the heart. No one went back to sleep that evening, everyone instead choosing to wait out until the morning hours in silence. Dale, for one, couldn't have gone back to sleep, and even if he had wanted to, between the adrenaline coursing through his body and the grotesque entity that had taken to haunting his dreams, Diao was more than happy to spend the remainder of the evening awake on his feet. Lucy scrawled feverishly in a notebook, the scratching of her pen against paper, often the loudest sound in the room. Ray had taken to nervously pacing the length of the hallway. Danny seemed outwardly unfazed, spending the rest of the evening watching the windows with his hands held behind his back. The group let out a collective sigh of relief as the sun began to rise over the city the next day. Danny in particular seemed relieved that the evening was over, dabbling at a batch of nervous sweat on his brow with the back of his sleeve. Breakfast that morning was a quiet, somber affair, but once again it was better than going hungry. The mood from the previous evening had carried over, and Dio's gathered his belongings in silence, leaning his backpack and his shovel over his shoulder. At this point, Dio took solace only in the fact that by this time tomorrow, he would and what remained of his friend group would be pulling up to the safe place. He wouldn't reunite with his parents and finally have a place to call home in all of this. Of course, in order for those dreams to be realized, he and the rest of his company would have to survive the next 24 hours, increasingly easier said than done. The greatest threat to their survival had been among them the whole time. Now he had been excised, cut out of the group like sugary cereal out of the diet. The group got an early start the next morning, everyone eager to find to exit Alley Enterprises and leave the memories that came with it far in their wake. Danny grumbled under his breath about having to take point, but with Terry gone, Dale was the group's best prospect for keeping the creatures at bay. While he might not have possessed Terry's raw strength or height or ferocity of gravity, Dale lost his train of thought. It was Rita's idea to cross over to the hotel using the skybridge that connected Elliot Enterprises and the Lucella Grand Plaza Hotel from the rooftop of the hotel. She explained that they could look across the city and see the safe place. If it was not just an urban legend, they would be able to see it from the hotel. If not, well then, they would be free to go their separate ways. Quartet all agreed that that was fair. One way or another, their time as a traveling company would have to end. They had been through a lot together. What was one more adventure? Daylight did the city no favors. Sunshine only serving to illuminate the city's less enticing elements. Leo and Danny in tow, he pushed the door to the rooftop, wind open, whipped at the four of them as they pushed through. The team sky bridge was generous. What they were really greeted with was two thin pieces of wood thrown gracelessly across the two buildings. Don't look down, Dio thought to himself, the person he thought most of his thoughts to. Don't look down, Dio, look down. The thick fog that seemed to have accompanied the virus arrival settled into a fine haze in the city. The narrow street and building almost funneling it through the streets. If he looked down and squinted his eyes, Dio could see infected shuffling through that fog. There was a telltale glowing eye and their ever-present scent of decay. Dio still had not told anyone about his dream, but every time he saw the creature and their crimson eyes, he was reminded of the entity's flowering head and its terrible mismatched eyes. The creature ambled in the darkness, shuffling through the fog, unaware that they were being watched. Rita was the daintiest among them, so it was quickly decided that she would be the first cross. The two planks stretched beneath her weight, but held as she shuffled belly first across them. The door to the roof behind them opened and closed. Dio heard Lucy scream before he even saw the creatures, a half-dozen of them, moving toward the quartet with a slow, shuffling, awkward gait. 6 didn't seem like many, but the group had lost nearly half its original number. They were outnumbered by the time Diego had noticed the set of the glowing eyes. It was almost too late. Almost. The head of Dio's garden shovel had been more action in the last few days than it ever had as a garden utensil. The creature had stumbled right past Danny and lunged for Dio, who had both pent-up frustration and that means with which to work out. The half-dozen creatures that had sneaked up on them would be quickly dealt with. They must not have completely jammed their main entrance of Ellie's Enterprises when they had shut Terry out. Another strike on another creature, as Rita was so fond of pointing out. A simple blow to the head was enough to stun the creatures for 10 seconds. It was what to do with those 10 seconds that was the difference between becoming a survivor and becoming lunch. Go, Dio shouted to his companions as if they needed to be told. Lucy was already scrambling across the two planks. The boards cracked ever so slightly as they scratched her way across. Danny made a massive leap from the rooftop in a panic, braying loudly as he landed on the hotel roof. In his excitement, he knocked one of the planks off the roof, the long piece of wood falling over, and as it tumbled to the ground, the wooden clattering could barely be heard as the board landed stories below them. It was Dio's turn to grumble loudly under his breath. There were still 6 of the creatures shuffling toward him, and 3 people who could help him, who were on the other roof. On the 2 planks that consisted his bridge to freedom had just plummeted 20 feet to the ground. Math had never been his best subject, but it seemed that the odds were stacked against him. Still, he was not going to stand here and let nature take its course. Dale hopped onto the ledge of the roof and began to scoot himself carefully across the remaining plank of wood. It was a delicate balancing act, his shovel acting as the ballast to keep him balanced as he inched his way across. The board beneath him began to groan and creak beneath his weight. No, not his weight, but the weight of 2 creatures who had mindlessly begun their journey across the plank as well. In their eyes, Dale was nothing but a meal who had walked off their plate. It was only right to chase their food. Dale had 3/4 of the way across the plank. He could see Danny, Lucy, and Rita waiting with outstretched arms to pull him in. Dale was certain that he was going to make it across. He was wrong. With a heart-wrenching sprack, the board splintered and cracked beneath him, splintering into a dozen shredded pieces. The plank could have held his weight, but the added stress of 2 of the creatures was more than one lowly piece of wood could take. Dio watched as they plummeted to the ground, landing somewhere in the fog. Dio expected to suffer the same fate. Gravity was a cruel mistress, and he was either falling incredibly fast or not at all. He opened his eyes, greeted by the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. The shovel had caught one of the hotel's drain pipes. He had fallen less than 5 feet. Diego pulled himself up onto the roof. With Lucy and Rita's help, the creature left on Ellie Enterprise's roof, walked idly to the edge, and turned back, seemingly put off by the concept of having to work for their food. Diego unlatched his shovel and strapped it back across his shoulder, taking a seat on the edge of the roof to catch his breath. He was quickly beginning to lose count of how many near-death encounters he had experienced. In the last few days, and they weren't over, there was only 2 ways off the roof of the Grand Plaza Hotel, and Diego didn't trust his knees to shoulder the load. The hotel would undoubtedly be overrun with the infected, and their only way of hope was to fight their way through. That was fine with Diego. He had become increasingly accustomed to fighting his way through things, but he wanted to come across a creature who only wanted to engage in a spirited debate. It was unlikely Diego stood ready to rally the rest of the party, but their attention was elsewhere. 3 of them were gathered on the opposite side of the roof, looking out over the city. Diego had walked through the city. He didn't need to see what desolation looked like from above. After a while, his curiosity got the better of him, and he made his way across the roof to the other side. Diego had been wrong. He did not need to see this. Across the city was a lone building shining in the middle of town. It was the biggest building that Diego had ever seen. Even from a distance, he could see that it was at least 5 stories tall and made of gleaming glass that reflected the pink and orange morning sun back across the sky. If he squinted his eyes, Diego swore that he could make out gates and people milling about outside. Not creatures, not monsters or behemoths or beasts, but people. An exhausted smile broke over Diego's face as the 4 of them looked out at their newfound sanctuary. There it was, the safe place. Diego knew only about reputation, rumors, whispers by survivors in passing, but he knew that this was it. And that's the end of chapter 4. So, friends, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow us on social media, Funkyplaybrothers, Funkyplaybrothers, and please remember to subscribe to our YouTube. Thanks for watching. Bye!